Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge Event to enable clinical research infrastructure information session. My name is Josh Shapiro with Capital Consulting, and I'll be assisting with the logistical support for today's session. If you need technical assistance, please click the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, type your issue into the chat, and one of our techs will respond to you. Finally, please be aware that today's session is being recorded. Closed captioning is available by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And now I'll turn it over to Sandy Vance with the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge to kick off today's event officially. Sandy?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this important information session and update on the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge event. So glad that you could be here today. We are excited to share with you this cross-agency collaboration. We're going to talk you through a number of things that are going to happen in preparation for the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge event and how you can engage to drive clinical research infrastructure forward. As I said, we've got a number of different agencies involved, including the Vulcan HL7 Accelerator, who will be contributing multiple implementation guides. The ASTP, formerly known as ONC, is contributing in-kind resources to help drive this forward, and the FDA will be contributing to several of our use cases. So thank you to all of them for participating. Today, we're going to walk you through how each of these agencies is involved, what the Vulcan Accelerator is all about, and how the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge event intends to operate and pull industry together to implement various HL7 FHIR implementation guides and collaborate with several of these agency initiatives. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with Stefan Konya from the Office of the ASTP, and he'll get us started.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Perfect.
So first off, thank you, Sandy, for opening us up, and thank you to everybody who signed up for this webinar today or are watching it back on the recording. This is exciting for us. It's one of the roles that we like to play as a coordinator. And one of the things we're going to get through today is a good sense of why this work is important, how it came to be, and then, like Sandy mentioned, how you can get involved. But before we do that, I want to give you a little bit more background on some of the key partners that are involved, including my agency, the Office of the National Coordinator, now known more formally as the Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy. So one thing, if you are familiar with ONC, this might be familiar to you, but if not, I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. Our agency started just over 20 years ago. We're in our 20th anniversary. It was created by an executive order in the Bush administration. And then it was formalized and established in statute in 2009 with the passage of the HITECH Act. And we are the single agency charged with formulating a whole of government, all of federal government health IT strategy, and coordinating that activity across all of government in order to advance the goals of a better and safer healthcare through interoperable nationwide health IT infrastructure. Click, please. And so again, it's these two key acts, the HITECH Act in 2009, that really helped incentivize the adoption of electronic health records and moving off of paper into digital formats as we work to build that national infrastructure. And then it wasn't until the 2016 21st Century Cures Act where we tried to close some of the gaps that were out there around information blocking practices to promote greater interoperability and ideally get greater value out of all of that digital information that's existing today. Next slide. So a couple other things to mention about as far as what our vision and priorities are. It really gets back to building that digital foundation that all innovation and appropriate data exchange can happen and sit on top of. And that we try to do this by making interoperability easier, working with all of our federal partners and with the industry, leveraging modern 21st century technology and APIs, and then also ensuring the proper use of all that digital information and tools that is out there. So with a greater focus on health equity and design principles for data capture and use, and transparency around areas such as algorithm use and safety. Next slide. So this is our overall 20-year history. Actually, this even starts with the HITECH Act, so it's only really the last 16 years or so. And there's a couple of key points on here just to flag where it really did help advance the work. But I wanted to highlight there's a lot of things that happen in between those big pieces like the High Tech Act and the Cures Act, and more recently our HTI-1 and HTI-2 rules. Next slide. So when you think of ONC and ASTP, most people think about data standards, exchange standards, and nowadays more about use standards. The certification program, where we come up with the certification criteria, working with industry to determine what minimal functionality needs to be made available by electronic health record vendors that are meeting that certification criteria. And then how we promote exchange, both endpoint to endpoint exchange, as well as through networks via things like TEFCA. And we do this, and a lot of people aren't as familiar with this, but we do this in coordination across government and across industry stakeholders. And it is a tough balancing act frequently, but something that we always strive to do better every day. For those greater goals and objectives of advancing that development and use of health IT, and to establish those expectations for data sharing. And here's some of the key impact factor areas. I'm going to come back to that in just a quick second, but let's move on. The one thing I want to highlight is when you think about coordinating across government, it's not just within HHS, although we are located within the Office of the Secretary inside HHS, and we get to work across all HHS agencies, which is everything you see on the right side of the screen. We also work with just as many, if not more, agencies that sit outside of HHS. And we do this through primarily two vehicles. One is an internal federal interagency federal health IT coordinating council. It has subgroups to it and everything else, as well as health IT alignment policy, looking at how can we make sure that the requirements that are coming out from our programs on certification and data standards are being supported and bolstered through other agencies and their programs and policy levers as well. Next slide. But I also wanted to, for the purposes of this call, highlight that we do this in coordination with industry. And in the case of FHIR and its adoption, we work very closely with HL7 and its community of FHIR accelerators. If you're not as familiar with FHIR accelerators, they're affinity groups that come together with specific data use and data sharing needs. And so the Argonaut project's focused on provider to provider primarily. Da Vinci's been working on payer to provider. Helios, one of the newer ones, is focused on public health, and we partner with CDC on that program. The Codex is focused on cancer care and research. Karen is consumers. FAST is infrastructure use cases that can cut across all of these. Gravity is social determinants of health. And the Vulcan project, very relevant to today's topic, obviously, is around clinical trials. One thing that I want to mention is whenever possible, sometimes there's overlap between these accelerators and we try to bring them in. So for instance, if we're thinking about cancer-related clinical trials, we'll certainly want to include Codex in those conversations and have them as part of this work. The other part is if we're thinking about infrastructure needs like consent and electronic consent, and FAST is working on that, we'd love to then repurpose and try to leverage that work in the work that we're doing with the Vulcan Interoperability Project so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we're constantly looking how we can build on work that's already been done out there and including everybody wherever possible. Next slide. So finally, on those impact areas, although we do have that category on healthcare research with clinical trials and supporting the Cancer Moonshot being two things that we flagged, I want to mention that these aren't individual silos. Whenever possible, again, the impact cuts across many areas. For instance, competition and choice. We want to make sure that that's available to clinical trials in those in the oncology Cancer Moonshot space. When it comes to patient access, we're thinking about that in the same context of clinical trials in Cancer Moonshot as well. And of course, health equity, you've heard us mention several times today. We believe that the principles of designing for health equity in everything that we do, or health equity by design, should be part of every activity we do. So we're always bolstering that as well. So next slide. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague who we're really excited to be working very closely with, Dr. Jose Galvez and the FDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Really appreciate that. And that was a fantastic introduction. Thank you. So I wanted to just touch bases a little bit on why the FDA is really why this is important to the FDA. So we're a regulatory agency primarily, and our mission is more about making sure that we have safe and efficacious products on the market. And because of that, we work with a lot of industry partners who are the ones conducting these clinical trials and everything else. And it's their jobs to create the wonderful products that we need in healthcare. As we can see here, I've got a little cartoon. We've got drugs since I'm in Cedar, but essentially any healthcare product that's on the market that falls under our jurisdiction, not only do they have to deal with us in the US, but they also have to deal with the, other health agencies that do basically the same thing. The issue, however, for our industry partners is that they can't just create a single product or a single payload and deliver it to the FDA and then to the Europeans and the Canadians and the Japanese. They have to create individual packages for each and every one of us. And that's really because our standards that we use in this, our data standards, haven't kept up with modern conventions. And although we have really great standards on how to represent the data, we haven't caught up on how that data is packaged, and then how do we interoperate between us as agencies. And so really, although admittedly all of our agencies are burdensome to the industry, the fact that they can't create a single product and deliver it to us slows down the entire process. The other thing is, which our current state of affairs is, that the standards as they currently exist really only deal with the data itself, not with the validation of the data and everything else. So we have separate products for data validation, and each one of the agencies has separate rules around data validation, et cetera. So you can imagine the quagmire that exists for our industry partners. So if you go to the next slide. So why is this important to FDA? Well, we recognize, one back. So we recognize that this is an impediment to industry and getting good data to not only FDA, but to our other health agencies as well. And so where FHIR comes in is that it really creates that central point, that central shared data model that industry can use. And then through the use of the implementation guides, which is really how interoperability is defined within FHIR, then support those packages to the various health agencies. And so now the industry needs to create realistically a single set of data which can reside in the shared data model. And then through the use of the implementation guides, agencies like such as FDA or any of our other partners can get the data that we need in order to be sure that we've got that we can assess whether a product is safe and efficacious for the market. And so this is really, I think, important for a variety of reasons, but first and foremost, it helps decrease the burden that us as agencies place on industry. Let's go to the next slide. So if we look at it from a different point of view, though, another reason why agencies, such as ours, are really interested in FHIR is because that shared data model really is what allows us to take things that are difficult and really truly makes them trivial. And so here I've got just a couple cartoons where we're looking at a couple projects that we're currently involved with at FDA, although there are many others, and you'll hear about some of them in just a few minutes. But one is, our REMS model, where we're looking at using FHIR to actually streamline the process for pharmacists and healthcare providers in order to get that information about whether a healthcare provider has met their REMS qualifications or REMS requirements in order to prescribe a particular medication. And utilizing the FHIR, we're able to streamline this process and interconnect systems which before weren't connected, and really the process centered around phone calls and faxes and everything else. The other project is our SPL FHIR, where we're taking the standard product label and also bringing it into FHIR and creating FHIR messages around that. So why is this important? Well, in the center, we have the EHR and really our patients and healthcare providers. And you can imagine, now that we have everyone on a shared data model and using appropriate implementation guides for messaging between them, we're able to do things that we couldn't do before. For example, now pharmacists could very easily, or healthcare providers could very easily, get our standard product label from us as a FHIR message, be able to pull in what are the adverse events that are known for this particular drug is from our standard label. We'll have physicians who can actually, if a patient comes in and has an adverse event, report it directly from an EHR or from the pharmacy. Pharmacists could report it directly from their systems, again, using the common infrastructure that something like FHIR gives us. So this is just a few of the examples as to why this is critical for us as a regulatory agency, and why we're so excited that we've got this infrastructure, which now not only brings in the standards used to represent the data, i.e. our shared data model, but also includes everything else around it, how it's transported through the implementation guides, how we communicate from one entity to the next, and how we validate that data as it moves through the pipeline. So it really is a complete package, which is why we're really very excited about that. And with that, I'll pass this on to Amy, who's now going to tell us about a little bit more about Vulcan.
Thanks, Dr. Galvez. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'd like to share with you a little bit more about Vulcan. It is a HL7 FHIR Accelerator, and we do work with all the other accelerators, but we have a very unique construct of Vulcan, and that's that we consider ourselves the research community. We're dedicated to both translational and clinical research. And so if you look at some of the members that we have outlined here, which includes ONC and FDA, we strive to include as many of the stakeholders' perspectives as possible. And that way, when we sit down to create the future of clinical research, which is the beauty of being a part of Vulcan, we're sitting elbow to elbow together to come up with that solution. The other thing that I think makes Vulcan very special is we have 4 guiding principles. We do not deviate from these 4 guiding principles. The first is that we're looking to bridge the data between clinical care and clinical research. And even as we're broadening out in Vulcan, just bringing the data between all of the organizations and the stakeholders that make up clinical research. And then when we bridge that, we like to strategically connect collaborators, like today, where we're talking about multiple groups that are working on things that are relevant to each other's work. How can we come together and thereby maximize our collective resources? And in the end, the goal, of course, is to find tools, to enable tools and solutions that we can deploy in order to move us into the future of clinical research. If we go to the next slide, please. So a little bit about how we got engaged with the Office of the National Coordinator, ASTP, and the work that they're doing, as well as many other government agencies and FDA. Here's a little bit of a timeline. In January 2023, there was a call for a request for information on data collection for emergency clinical trials and interoperability pilots. And Vulcan came together and wrote that response. What was great about it is when we looked at our body of work within Vulcan, we were working on how do you exchange data for schedule of activities? How do you exchange data in real world data? How about utilizing a digital protocol and other items? They really seem to align with the questions that were being asked in that RFI. And so the group that wrote it was a cross-functional team. There were people representing patients, small tech companies, large tech companies, EHRs, sponsors, regulators. It was a lovely group of people who came together and wrote one cohesive document. And through that, we got to have more and more conversations around how could Vulcan support the work that our government agencies were doing. In October 2023, we, along with several other of our fellow accelerators and other organizations, were named as individuals that could help hopefully this initiatives as we go forward and work with ONC to reach those goals. We continue as we go forward in responding to additional RFIs, including the ACTR initiative for ARPA-H. In May, we had the privilege of joining with the USCDI Cancer Summit. And in that, one of the work that our members have been doing around adverse events became relevant. And we're very excited to see how that work could be used to move forward adverse events in not only oncology, but all therapeutic areas. And so as we looked at this and all of the things that were coming together and the areas that we could help, we decided that we would put together something called the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge, bridge meaning to bring a connection of data, affectionately termed VIB, which in a few moments, Stefan will explain to you. I have one more slide I'd like to share with you though. So how does Vulcan really connect to all these government agency initiatives that I just talked about. Well, when we look at this and we looked at their body of work and what we had hopefully to offer to them, and our members' interest in what they're working very diligently on, we noticed first in the cancer case use cases, they were looking at real world data. We have a lovely IG out about that, that our colleagues from the FDA helped to support and right along with MITRE. We have the immune related adverse event work that we've done in IG in that area. When we looked at what ARPA-H was working on, we discovered that when you're starting an alternative model for clinical research, a non-traditional location, it's a really great time to set up the data interoperability in a way that is the easiest from the beginning. The equity with both the FDA and ONC, if we're able to reach these other areas and we're able to do this data in another way, and we're allowed to get outside of this, what I'll call the sphere of influence that we typically have and the reach that we typically have, we hope to make this more accessible, geographically pleasing, and diverse in clinical research. And then the last one is when we look specifically at the OSTP's clinical trial infrastructure. We see a lot of our work originally when we started in Vulcan had to do with the use of electronic health records. So that's a little bit about how Vulcan has really seen with the work that we're doing inside of our group could lend support and maximize those collective resources with our government agency initiatives. The thing I love about Vulcan is that we have an opportunity as a community to come together elbow to elbow with all sorts of different stakeholders and create the future. And through this group, we now have an opportunity to work with even bigger and greater initiatives that such as the ones that I've listed here. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to one of our members, Dr. Paul Sabatini, Senior Vice President of Clinical Research and an attending physician in gynecological oncology. Dr. Sabatini?
Well, thanks, Amy, for having me here today. So I'm responsible with the team at Memorial Sloan Kettering for the infrastructure, which supports clinical research. And just a quick word about some numbers, just to put it all in context. We have about 1,800 open studies. We do about 8,000 interventional accruals a year and about 15,000 non-interventional accruals a year. We have a multi-site trials core, which interacts with about 600 sites external to Memorial. And we have around 1,000 protocols open at our regional sites. And these sites are geographically close. They have the same electronic health record, but still it's quite challenging to get support for and data from those sites. And I think for most of us, the priority is really to increase access to our trials beyond the bricks and mortars of our institutions. And we want faster accruals. We want to get results faster. And this is really 100% related to the ability to acquire, organize, and analyze data. And I think we've all learned over time that just having an electronic health record or even having the same electronic health record with one of your collaborating sites does not solve the problem, and a dedicated approach and technology is required to do that. And I think in the national context, we want to be able to support this concept of decentralized clinical trials. That is, how do we go out in the community and to other sites and open trials, centrally maintaining the data and centrally doing the regulatory work so that sites that might not be able to get trials and might not have the local infrastructure could have access to them. And there are a couple things, that we think that is needed for this. And one we're not talking about today so much, and that's about streamlining regulations. The regulations have to be made simpler so we can go out in the community and do these trials without being prohibited. But the second thing is really all around that we speak the same language around the data and that we can share it. And I think preferably without so many people, because I think we're all drowning also in this idea that you need so many people to manually go and try to acquire and analyze and move this and data around. And this is precisely really what the FHIR technology and the Vulcan group is aiming to do. And just in closing, I would say, this only works, and I think we've learned this over time, is if we do it together. And that together means that we have the regulators and the sponsors, the institutions, academic sites, community sites, all at the same table and all working to the same end. And so we're happy to be a partner for this and would really encourage others to join if they have not done so already. So with that, I'll pass it over to Darren Weston to offer the pharma perspective.
Thanks so much, Paul. Really appreciate that. So yeah, Vulcan. So for me, I was intrigued by Vulcan a few years ago. And what intrigued me, and I think you've heard some of these points already, was that this concept of solving the interoperability of data and merging between clinical care, clinical research, not a trivial task, but the concept that there was this vibrant community that was bringing everyone together across the whole sphere, as Paul just mentioned, seemed really intriguing. And on a personal level, representing the pharmaceutical perspective, it became pretty clear to me that some of the macro R&D challenges that we suffer from can 100% be supported through Vulcan HL7 and FHIR. Things like developing a new drug is expensive, it's lengthy, time to market is increasing. There's a high failure rate, it's risky business. There's complicated regulatory requirements impacting time, cost, etc. So some of the key factors that came to the forefront for me really clearly, again, that within the walls that I work in, challenges we're dealing with every day: faster access to data, effective clinical trial recruitment, trying to reduce the cost of R&D, efficient study conduct, improving patient care, improving the transparency of data. All of these things seemed very tangible to be solved, difficult to be solved, but tangible nonetheless. And the work that Vulcan and the collective partners are doing, it was clear that we may be able to solve some of those. As I mentioned, faster access to data, really helping improve some of that, timely decision making. If healthcare providers, researchers have that faster access to relevant data, they can make more informed, timely decisions about patient care, clinical research, public health, etc. And really trying to improve the efficiency, creating better insights, even improving the kind of patient and site experience overall. But then as it relates to kind of effective recruitment, I think a lot of people don't realize that the enrollment period in a clinical trial, the time it takes from starting enrollment of patients to the point at which you finish, is pretty much a marker for the time it takes you to get a product through. And so again, improving that precision in patient identification, reducing the time and the resources that it requires to recruit patients, enriching the study populations in our research, recruiting more diverse patient populations, improving the generalizability of some of the study results. As I mentioned, increasing the speed of recruitment and ultimately optimizing the study designs by enabling better access to study feasibility and, again, reducing the risk of recruitment delays. I talked about, it's obvious how some of those things obviously funnel through into the cost of R&D, particularly the recruitment, patient retention. But also, as we think about this, the management of data, analyzing it, collecting and analyzing clinical trial data can be incredibly time consuming and resource intensive, but just ensuring that data quality, integrity, which is absolutely critical to the success of a trial, any issues, etc., they can cause delay, impact the validity of results. So kind of finding ways to improve that is absolutely crucial. In addition to kind of safety monitoring, ensuring the safety of trial participants, which is an absolute top priority, and addressing any safety concerns that can arise in a trial, but being able to do that much quicker, much faster throughout the life of a study. Then we talk about efficiency in the study conduct. I talked about that streamlined collection. Many of you who are perhaps engaged in clinical research will know it's a huge burden. Things like data re-entry, data queries, monitoring, etc. All of these things can be positively impacted through the implications of HL7 and FHIR. Improved data quality, again, standardizing the data exchange, reducing those potentials for errors, inconsistencies, etc. Making it easier to even share. I mean, you saw from Jose in terms of Jose, in terms of how can we share data easily between sponsors, regulators, etc. But across the board, that interoperability enables so many positive options for clinical trials, enhancing the collaboration between different stakeholders. And one that doesn't get talked about too much, but just making being a principal investigator actually attractive. Some of the operational burden that we have in our trials, trying to remove some of that, HL7 and FHIR and Vulcan ultimately can make a big difference. Then we've got things like improving patient care that I mentioned, improved data sharing, better clinical decision making, allowing clinicians better access to real-time patient data analytics, making better informed decisions about patient care, treatment, leading to ultimately better outcomes. And then the last one was around kind of greater data transparency. I think one aspect that's really important is improved patient trust. I think when patients have access to their own health data, they're more likely to trust healthcare providers, be more active in and involved in their own care. As I mentioned before, it kind of helping improve decision making, increased accountability, enhances research fundamentally overall. And then, as I mentioned many times over, there's a huge increase in transparency. When you have data shared across different healthcare settings, healthcare providers, organizations can all operate more efficiently. It helps reduce cost and, as I say, ultimately improving outcomes for patients. Just some concluding thoughts. Change management's needed to make this happen. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's really not a simple, trivial exercise, and I'm pleased with the incremental steps that we're making. But I think from a pharma standpoint, across our industry, we continue to invest in developing actual FHIR resources and expertise within our organizations. I think we know a lot about interoperability, but there's a lot we don't know, both the good and the bad. I think there are many things that will come that will also disrupt in a positive way, things like machine readable protocol information, things like that. There's so many options that I think will positively contribute to disrupting, but in a real positive way. Again, I hope that was helpful just to kind of provide you a few kind of pointers around why Vulcan HL7 FHIR is so important to enabling more efficient R&D from a pharmaceutical standpoint. So with that, let me hand back over to Stefan.
Great. Thank you so much, Darren. Appreciate it. All right. So now that you've heard a little bit of the reasons why we're doing this and why it's so important and the momentum that's gotten to where we are today, now we get to talk about what it is, what exactly is going to happen in the coming months, and what are we trying to achieve. So as far as what the event is, it's a chance to bring together the clinical research community alongside the clinical care community, and I would say technology developers as well in the health IT space, and a variety of other types of stakeholders through the Vulcan effort to try to pressure test what's already in the market, identify gaps, and then ultimately get to a point where we're having demonstrations. It's one thing to talk about this in theory. It's another thing to try to actually connect and move the data and test this and then demonstrate how the use of FHIR APIs can improve overall data quality, efficiency, and costs to conduct that research. And so we're leading up to an event on February 5th. Where they'll come together and do a virtual demonstration and showcase kind of what lessons learned and kind of what the next steps will be after that. And then also have a resource guide that's able for others who maybe weren't able to participate in the event to pick up and hit the ground running and level up with the rest of the industry. Next slide. And so those outcomes, again, reinforce a lot of what I just said. We're looking at that faster adoption of interoperability between healthcare and research, aided with the support of technology developers and the use of APIs, an increased understanding and use of FHIR implementation guides, both ones that are out there as well and the ones that may evolve in the future, to increase the maturity of FHIR resources with the goal of aligning those to US CDI and US CDI Plus, or the US Core Data for Interoperability and US Core Data for Interoperability Plus categories that ONC has been working on with the community. And then also try to get more people engaged, more people to have a seat at the table and not only identifying where the greatest opportunities are, but helping to test all of this to make sure that it truly does work for everyone who's involved across the spectrum. Next slide, please. I think one of the biggest takeaways here to give you a good sense of how and when the work is going to take is going to evolve over the next several months. So think about it in 4 phases. The first phase being on the left-hand side, what's going to happen in August and September. It's kind of getting organized and recruiting who are going to be the key partners to participate in this activity. The second phase being that blue bar in October through December, which is then organizing that work and rolling up our sleeves, getting into the weeds on it, providing that technical support to all the implementers who are going to be able to test all of this and make sure that it meets their individual needs. And then in January, getting ready to then produce how we document all of that and test it. And then in February, being able to showcase through that virtual environment demoing what we learned, what we achieved, and kind of the next steps. And then in that fourth phase, on the far right there, having all these outputs of resources that are able to be picked up by anybody, reused, and evaluated on an ongoing basis for their effectiveness. Next slide. And as far as the implementer benefits, I'm going to actually turn it over to Sandy, our project manager, to walk through why you should get involved and who we're looking to get involved, and then transition us into some of the more specific use case examples. Sandy?
Thanks, Stefan, so much. Well, there are a ton of benefits to being first to market in any kind of pilot, but our goal here is to really prop up supporters of these initiatives by giving support to them through a technical subject matter experts that really know fire and can help their implementations be strong, and to bring them together in use case or focus area teams that will allow them to work together. And so the events that you'll see over the next couple of months, as Stefan was describing, will really allow these participants to come together and be supported with their implementations. And so they'll get that support plus visibility through the event in February, as well as the thrill of being sort of first to implement some of this stuff with their peers. We are committed to having in each of these focus areas at least one of each of these types of implementer. One would be the technical solution providers, so those that are building systems to support clinical research. We also want to have clinical research sponsors who are able to come to the table and share their expertise in the use case development. And then finally, clinical research sites who will experience the ability to process things faster and be able to be part of more research studies. So we are so fortunate to have a team of experts who are supporting Vulcan as champions of the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge Event. Each of these people has dedicated their time voluntarily to spearhead one of the focus areas that they're going to share with you today. And the idea here is that each of these 5 focus areas will turn into a technical team that will lead the charge in an iterative process to develop the end-to-end workflows and all of the demonstrations necessary to show the value and what's possible in implementing FHIR. So first, we're going to have Debbie Willis, who's going to talk about the patient focus area. Debbie?
No, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Well, I am very happy to be heading up the patient information exchange use case. If you know me, you'll know that this topic has been a passion and a mission for me personally for many years. Several years ago, the ONC mandated that all certified EHRs have a FHIR API for patients to import their medical records into any app of their choice. This was a very powerful mandate. It provided the ability for patients to now have their own personal miniature EHR with all of their data from all of their providers fully under their own control. With their own miniature EHR, patients are now able to do many things that were not possible in the past. In this use case, we're going to focus on how FHIR has enabled patients to share their data with researchers. I honestly believe this is a game changer that will bring us cures faster. Patients are now able to directly share their EHR data, patient-reported outcomes, adverse events, and many other things that provide valuable information to sponsors, CROs, researchers, and government entities. Everyone is a winner in this scenario. Patients are now empowered to become a real team member in clinical research rather than just feeling like a guinea pig. This also provides a better experience for the patient and helping to improve retention. With patients having their own miniature EHR to engage in research, this also provides a pathway for data to be returned to the patient after a clinical trial. The research team is now able to get almost real-time data transferred from the EHR into the EDC through the patient's personal system, eliminating much of the manual data entry that we currently see in the swivel chair approach. The research team is also able to request patient-reported outcomes and receive adverse events directly from the patient, providing better patient safety surveillance. Receiving this robust data from the patient provides a more complete understanding of the impact of the intervention, therapy, or service. And because patients can share their data from multiple locations, this helps to enable decentralized trials. Also, because the patient's data belongs to and follows the patient can consent to share their records and their outcomes over a long period of time, facilitating longitudinal studies. Patients will also be able to share their data for public health, to provide more timely alerts during a pandemic, or to report a food or a drug safety event, or they can share any other information with the public for the public safety. I believe the ability for patients to have their own miniature electronic medical record and share their data with whomever they want will have the same impact to clinical care and research as when providers adopted EHRs. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Chi.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. And healthcare is very complicated. And if we think about the data, it's even more complicated. It's great we have FHIR as a standard, so people can speak the same language, but the content that's spoken, it actually matters quite a bit. And many of you might know that for a patient recently discharged from the hospital, if they do go back to the ED, half of them actually will go to a different emergency department that is not the original one. On average, the Medicare patient might see 7 different providers in 4 different clinics. And so by just the healthcare system in the US, it's very common to see that the patient data might reside in multiple systems. And I've been fortunate enough to work with the Health Information Exchange for the past 15 years. And really see some of the challenges with clinical care when data is in disparate clinical systems and difficult to share. When it comes to the really working with for the clinical research, and especially since 2019, I was so excited to see the draft guidance from FDA about real world data. And subsequently, my first engagement on this topic is actually about a synthetic arm data that's required to support some of the early, during the early pandemic, where some of the therapeutics is very urgent. We need to conduct a study very quickly and really see the power of the data that where you can look at a large regional sources such as the Health Information Exchange, you can get access to a large amount of data very quickly. But more importantly, in the traditional Health Information Exchange, the organizations which are the member institutions based on the consent model, all the data is already linked, which means that if I go to a clinical care setting and I move on to another hospital or clinic, whether it's because of insurance or because of a specialty care that's required, the data is already linked. And I think this is very important. The FDA RWD draft guidance actually talked about the data gaps in whether it's the EHR or whether it's a single hospital systems, even with the patient privacy preserving record linkage technology, there's also the need to standardize the data, put into common data model. This is why I think in my focus area, Health Information Exchange will be tremendously powerful to bring together longitudinal data that can be used for real world data. And it will be a very valuable for long-term follow-up in the cancer scenario, which we have been talking about. Surveillance is very important. So super excited really to work on this area and looking for participants who are willing to leverage the longitudinal data in the Health Information Exchange for the real world data use case. Now next, Rich.
Thank you very much, Chi. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I'm here to present a use case which is a collaboration between Ignite Data and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. We are focused on moving data from hospital sites through to sponsors when they are running clinical trials. I'll start with the why. Why is this so important? It's a huge pain point when we're running clinical trials. They are laborious, and both the hospitals have to spend time entering data into electronic data capture systems for the sponsors, and the sponsors have to spend significant time also working through that data on their side to look at the number of queries that are being raised inside the EDC system. They're having to go back to the hospital sites and bother them to review that information. And we also have a huge amount of monitoring going on in the clinical trials as well, as I think Dr. Sabatini and Darren both touched on earlier on. We aim to remove this. There is a swivel chair problem at the moment where someone has to sit in a hospital site, sometimes hundreds of staff, and they have to look at one screen on one side, get the data from the electronic health record, and then enter that into another system. In 2024, it should not be like that. It needs to change. We've been building an interoperability system that sits between the EHR and the EDC and uses the FHIR standards where we've been using the implementation guides to build a product that can move that data efficiently and effectively between those two systems. So without further ado, I would like to pass over to Mike, who can really drill in to the benefits, back one slide, who can drill into the benefits around what impact moving data using the FHIR standard in this way can have on a clinical trial.
Thanks, Rich. So the benefits of using EHR to EDC technology when we're leveraging HL7 FHIR are improved data collection efficiency. It enhances data accuracy and reliability. And what we found is that it's 1.5 times faster than those manual data entry processes, the swivel chair that Rich was referring to. It also reduces data entry error by 99% versus the manual technique. It increases user satisfaction, not only from the site, but also from the sponsor. It strengthens interoperability, and it's more efficient and reduces effort across the clinical trial. And conversion from paper to electronic standards-based formats establishes a framework for multiple innovations such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. And with that, I'd like to pass it off to Scott and Mitra.
Hi, and in the interest of time, I'll be talking through this slide, but just for orientation, both of us are from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Mitra is coming at this particular focus area from primarily, but not exclusively, from an adverse event perspective. And I'm coming at it more from a label and product information perspective. To be clear, this focus area, as opposed to being an area of sole interest to regulators, is one that I think brings together a number of the many areas of clear interest to regulators to ultimately, in a future state, benefit the common public good. So talking about the perspectives, the bigger perspective is that these areas that I'll outline here are, along with so many other domains of information, are in reality really interconnected. Whether it's patient symptoms and diagnoses, public health detection of either drug issues or infectious diseases or other public health issues, pharmacy information about the makeup of every drug, medical product, and so on and so forth, adverse events. This is all connected. And so, an attractive future state is one in which there is data interoperability across what some folks on this call may know as referred to as a learning health system, which is not a large language model. Is the idea of all this information connects to each other in various interconnected ways. So the focus in this focus area that we're putting out here aligns with that larger thinking. It's definitely ambitious, but this event is a perfect opportunity to try out something ambitious. And we really hope that there will be interest in parties on this call and out there viewing this call at a later date who can help us in this figure out a way to demonstrate a future state where something like this is possible. So the main description of this focus area is, a future state in which we can support adverse event investigations, because that there is in the future an interoperable data flow between informations on the makeup of drug products, so the label, adverse event reporting, and pharmacy information systems. There's more in that ecosystem, but we're just sort of focused on these to support rapid investigation of new or increased adverse events related to medical products. Reason for this, what is the current problem state? Once there is known to be an issue, finding out the source of that issue, what is the problem causing this particular adverse event, is the ability to investigate this is still limited, because so the information within a medical product is either if structured, it's still somewhat siloed, or in many cases, and that's changing over time, unstructured. It's not structured computable data. Adverse event identification and reporting is currently a highly manual process. Again, siloing is still an issue. And pharmacy information is typically also in its own space. And, there isn't a fully interoperable standard to allow the harmonization between these groups. Between these areas of information. So the benefits of this envisioned future state that we'd like to demonstrate as a sort of a possible future is we would have an enhanced speed, accuracy, and comprehensiveness of the detection of new or increased medical product related adverse events, and same improvements in the investigation of those where these events are coming from directly. This should also allow us to have a better integrated healthcare, pharmacy, and public health information system ecosystem, and ultimately promote rapid public health actions to reduce and prevent adverse events, improving health outcomes, reducing unnecessary health issues, and ultimately save lives. So with that, I apologize, I'm handing this over to...
It's either me
Yes,
or
Cal Collins.
Cal Collins. Thanks,
Cal
Scott.
Collins.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Appreciate that. And last but hopefully not least, in the internal sponsor systems focus area, we're aiming to show how adopting FHIR-based integration approaches for sponsor systems, including their technology vendors, CROs, and other partners, can create more cohesive infrastructure and better ROI. We'll be diving into use cases around digitized clinical protocols, structured schedules of activities, adverse event data sharing, and real-world data utilization. So why is this important? Aligning sponsor-oriented systems, including electronic data capture systems, clinical trial management systems, IVRS, TMF, just to name a few, and many of you know there's a whole acronym soup of them, with aligning them with the healthcare industry's ongoing commitment to a FHIR-based ecosystem will help us move beyond point-to-point integrations, data silos, and duplication of data. Today, there are too many separate touch points and review points in our business processes that rely on manual duplication of data across systems, reconciliation of that data, and or point-to-point integrations across systems that can be brittle and expensive. As you heard Darren describe earlier in the webinar, this delays informed decision-making in ways that slow recruitment and can limit the patient experience. This is true internally within sponsors, and also, as we've heard today, when interfacing with regulatory agencies, research sites, healthcare providers, and patients. So adopting FHIR-based interoperability for sponsor systems is, from the perspective I look at things, a key part of pursuing a write once, run anywhere world in a way that will leverage all the great work that's going on in the broader ecosystem and help us reuse that. The benefits of executing in this focus area include improved data quality and collection efficiency, streamlined study planning, startup, and execution,
and the possibility to better align clinical care and research in ways that benefit patients and reduce site burdens. So in moving from siloed systems into more cohesive infrastructure, we aim for improved ROI and ability to leverage emerging and future technologies, things like AI and machine learning. So with your participation, I think the work in this area can have tremendous impact on its own and also be highly complementary to all the other work streams that you just heard about. Thanks, and back to Sandy.
Thanks, Cal. So you've heard a lot today. We've run through these use cases and these focus areas super quickly. There's a lot of work ahead of us to collaborate and flesh out what these demonstrations are going to look like and what projects will be included. So our call to the research community to collaborate is for you research community innovators who are out there running the business of research day in and day out. Please, keep an eye on this. Reference it to your technical people, let them know that they can get engaged. And then, of course, we hope that you will participate in the final demonstration that'll take place in early February 2025. For you FHIR implementers who are out there and the technical teams who are supporting organizations in the transition to APIs to improve the way you're functioning, this is a tremendous opportunity for you to get involved and be supported in this process. And so we ask that you reach out to us and see if there is a good fit for you in one of these use cases. I and my technical team are also happy to review not just what you've seen here today, but what sort of the trajectory of each of these use cases are. Our plan is to get teams together on a weekly basis to work through the details of these storylines, and we would love to have your participation. So in order to express interest, we ask that you email vib@hl7vulcan.org. That's this email here on the table, or on the slide, excuse me. And you can get in touch with us if you have feedback on one of the use cases that you've seen. If you're interested in participating at the technical level, we're happy to talk with you. We'll also be presenting information like what you've seen here today in a number of different forums, one of which is at the HL7 work group meeting in September. So if you're in Atlanta, look us up. I know Stefan will be there, Amy will be there. Of course, I will be there throughout the Connectathon and work group meeting. So please, get a hold of us, and we're happy to engage and have you participate in this exciting opportunity to demonstrate what's possible. I believe that wraps us for the day, and we will be sure to post a link to these slides that you've seen, as well as the entire recording out on the information session website that ONC has created for today. We'll be sending it out via email as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you.